he's someone that has consistently led in a lot of different ways, and his examples always been really impactful. He's willing to try things that other people may not be willing to try. He's someone that stands up for people who can't stand up for themselves. I remember a time when we were younger, we were walking home from school, and there's a little girl who's getting picked on across the street. And he saw it the first day, and then the second day, we weren't totally sure what was happening. That first day, the second day, it happened again, and Kyle walked over and got made sure the guys understood that it wasn't going to happen again, and walked her home, and it stopped. And I think the true test of strength are people that are willing to stand up for people that can't stand up for themselves. And he's always set a great example that way, and he's always set a great example in terms of trying things that are intimidating, and not being bound by what people say you can and can't do. So he's been a tremendous example for me, and a huge impact on my life. My dad definitely came from him, and whenever he had us help out, and it didn't matter what we were doing, he was going to make sure that we did it right, and that we did it completely, and that we double checked our work. And there were times where, whether it was raking the leaves or sweeping the basement, or whatever the job, painting the house, whatever the job he had given us to do, you knew, or we knew as kids, that the first time, well, the first time you came through to check, it wasn't going to get the approval. The second or third time, you were. And it became, as kids, you always probably complain about that stuff, but it also became a competition to see who could finish the quickest, and the best, and meet that challenge. So I would say that he was built that way, and he instilled that in all of his kids. Well, I never thought I would be a coach. Period. I never wanted to do that. I was just telling you about Kyle, and Kyle was an investment banker, and that's what I thought I was going to do. And Kyle was working in Melbourne, Australia, while I was in college as an associate, and he said you should do your study abroad in Australia. So we went out there early. I went out there early, and I didn't have any friends. He was working all the time. It wasn't you can't appreciate this, but there was no internet. There's no cell phones. There's like two TV stations, maybe three. Incredibly dating myself, but the question was, what was I going to do with the time between when I got there and when I started college? And a woman that Kyle worked with, was in a sporting goods store, and she ran into this guy, Stan Long, and Stan Long was trying to pick her up. And he was an American guy, and he had said, I'm coaching an American football team here. I'm the head coach. And she went back to the office. She mentioned it to Kyle, and I went to see Stan Long and said, "Could I help out with your team? I thought it would be a fun thing to do, and a way to meet Australians similar age." So I ended up helping him out with a team called the Doncaster Devils, and it was about 5 minutes into practice where I realized that Stan Long didn't know very much about football. And again, there was no internet, so there's no way to really check background. So he looked like a football player. He looked like he knew what he was doing, but we were doing push-ups and sit-ups and calisthenics, but there's no football. So that went for about 2 weeks, and the team had been very successful, and they fired Stan Long. And they said to me, "Would you coach this team?" And I'm thinking, I'm 23 years old. I'm not in a position to really coach the team, but I love the guys that were there. So I said, I'll try to help out. So I had my college coach fax me playbook stuff, and I would study it in the afternoon, and then I would install it in the evening. And end up the Doncaster Devils didn't last. So they fold, and I thought, okay, I'm done with football in Australia, get ready to go to school. And a group of guys that I became friends with went to a new team called the Q Colts, and they asked me to come and just look at it, and see what I thought. So I went and ended up becoming the defensive coordinator and de facto head coach of that team. And we got to the summer, and I had to go home and make some money for school. And I said to him, look, I have to do this. And they said, well, what would it take for you to stay? And I explained how much I'd make in the summer. And they said, okay, well, this will be your summer job. So I ended up coaching that team, and we beat a team in the championship that had won 26 straight. And we won the championship that year. And at that point, it was such an amazing experience. And I saw all the different aspects of coaching, and I thought this could be really interesting. And the next year they had me come out. I took the second semester, my senior year off, went back out, coached them again. We won the championship again, and I thought, okay, I'm gonna try coaching as a professional, or at least I'm gonna try to see what it's like in the U.S. And then I was able to get a job as a ball boy. That's the only job I could get in the NFL with the Cleveland Browns. But it was that experience in Australia that made me go from thinking that coaches were just glorified gym teachers with high shorts and whistles to, hey, this could be a really intriguing, interesting, challenging profession. When I told my mom I was going to be a ball boy, she's like, wait a second, you've got $25,000 in student debt, which, this was a lot. This was in the early 90s, and you're going to be a ball boy. And I don't know if you know much about ball boys, but they're usually about 13 to 15. Some are 12. And so I have a picture of myself with all the guys, and I've got my arms around them, and I'm about a foot and a half, 2 feet taller. We've all got towels around our neck. You're doing laundry. For me, it wasn't, I wanted to stand out, but it was about trying to understand what it took to be a pro football coach. How do you get into this building? What define those guys? And there are some great examples on that staff. Kirk Ferentz was on that staff. Nick Saban was on that staff. It was Bill Belichick's staff. I mean, there were tons and tons of guys that went on to have really successful careers. But there was a period between OTAs and training camp where it's dark, as you know, and I couldn't afford to go home, so I asked to volunteer in the PR department, and they allowed me to volunteer in the PR department. And every single day that I went in, I was going to try to do the absolute best job I could. I was going to try to show that I could add value to the organization, that I could make the people around me life's easier. And that's what you have to do as a young guy. You have no real value. You have your goal and objective should be, okay, how can I let these guys allow me back in the building the next day? And that was my mindset, is what can I do today to make sure that I get invited back tomorrow? And at the end of training camp, after I went back to being a ball boy, they didn't like the PR interns that they had. They had been fighting with each other. They hadn't been working hard. And Kevin Byrne, who I'd worked for in that volunteer capacity, said, would you like to be the PR intern for the season? And I said, yeah, I definitely want to do that. It was, some of it was finding a way to get in the building as a ball boy, then finding other opportunities that I could create for myself. And that was volunteering in PR, and then making sure that I added value every day, and they want to invite me back. And I've had so many conversations with young guys trying to get into the industry who think they're going to start as assistant GM or assistant head coach. It's like, no, you have no value. I don't care where you went to school. I don't care what you did. Your value right now has to be established. And the best thing you can do is to show that you're willing to do whatever it takes to have them invite you back. I get asked that quite a bit, and there's no playbook for being a head coach. And I think there's a lot better preparation now than there was even back then. And I came from a system that was very tight with information, so it's not like they were grooming you to become a head coach. And I had very strong football fathers. Bill Belichick was a football father. Bill Parcells was a football father. And I find myself, as I raise my kids, I often hear my dad's voice as I say things to them, because it's what you learn, it's what you know. And as a head coach, I thought, who am I to do things differently than what these guys do? These are two of the greatest coaches in the history of the game, multiple Super Bowls between them. This is the system that works. And I still believe that's the system that works. The most important thing that I learned is that you can do all those things that you learned and all those things that you like, but you got to make sure that you do it in your voice, in your personality. And I feel that sometimes I took on too much of their voice and not enough of my own. And that authenticity is important in football. It's important in business. It's important in anything that you do. And it's a little bit easier said than done because of how strong our mentors and the lessons are in our upbringing. But that would be the most important advice I'd have for him, is to take the best of what he's learned, do what he believes in, do the things that he wants to do, and make sure he does it in a way that's as authentic as possible to him. I had three that stand out. One is when I first got the job. I was in the an elevator in the hotel going back up to my room, and I'm decked out. I just had done the press conference. Maybe it was just like day one or two, fully decked out in Jets gear. And a guy in the elevator next to me goes, "Hey, you like the Jets?" I'm like, "Yeah, I like the Jets." He's like, "What do you think of that new head coach?" I'm like, I think he's pretty good. I think he's going to do a great job. I like a lot of things about him. He's like, "Yeah, we'll see." I'm like, "Yep, okay, good talking to you." So that was one. And then early on, around draft time, my wife and I had a little bit of downtime. We were with my son Jake, and we wanted to just go get something to eat in the town that we were living in. And this restaurant said they're having a Jets draft party that day. Um, and I thought, okay, well this is good. We'll probably be able to get a table here because we couldn't get a table anywhere else. We walk in, and the guy's like, "Yeah, sorry, buddy, we got no room. This is it's all booked out for the Jets draft party." I was like, okay, all right, that's cool. We'll find somewhere else. So that was a little bit of the anonymous part early on. And I'd say another one that stands out is we were going to film Sesame Street, and I brought Jake to film me, and we were walking. I was holding his hand, and we had it was a Tuesday. We hadn't had a great game against Buffalo the Sunday before. This truck driver pulls up next to us, like, "Hey, Mangini, what was that pile of shit you put on the field on Sunday? You suck." My son's like, "Dad, why is that guy? Why is he yelling at you? What?" I'm like, "It's probably a misunderstanding." That was another fun time. The first year against New England at New England was a game that stood out because obviously I respect that organization so much, and I knew how hard they worked and how smart they were in their approach. And I thought that the players did a great job taking the information that we had, putting together the game plan that we had. And New England had been the bully for a long time, and it takes some time to stand up to the bully, and it takes sort of a little different approach and resilience to make that stand. I thought the fellas did a great job making the stand, winning at their place, and being able to beat an opponent that prepares that hard is always really satisfying. Just like it's frustrating when you lose an opponent that probably isn't working as hard as you are. Those tend to sting even a little bit more. Well, one of the things that I think is hard for every coach is how all encompassing it is. From the start of training camp until the end of the season, you're locked in, and there's no weddings, there's no family events, there's no sick days. None of those things exist. You just have to find a way to push through week in and week out, and then each week you put together the equivalent of a thesis, and your thesis goes against someone else's thesis, and win or lose, you start over again with that process. The drain that it has on the family, or the inability to have work life balance, I'd say is one of the biggest challenges, I'm sure, for anybody involved in sports. With Mike, one of the things that I really loved about working with him was we could agree, but we weren't disagreeable, and we could argue about things, but we were going to support each other regardless of what happened. And if someone came into my office and was complaining about Mike, I was going to call Mike and have him come and be part of the conversation. It was the same thing with Mike. If someone went into his office and was unhappy with what I was doing, he was going to bring me in, and we were going to have an open conversation. And I'd say a great example of us being able to work through the process was drafting DeBrickshaw Ferguson. It was a situation where Vernon Davis was unbelievable in college, and he was not only a huge threat in the passing game and great speed, but he was also a true tight end. He could block. He could block in a meaningful way in line, and I knew the value that a tight end had and the pressure put on defenses. And there weren't a lot of guys that I had seen like Vernon to that point. And DeBrickshaw was a guy that was incredibly talented as well, and it was at a position of desperate need. We didn't have a left tackle, and so we both liked both players a lot. But knowing that if we took DeBrickshaw, we would have no chance at Vernon, and not knowing whether or not we'd have a chance at another left tackle because we had two first round draft picks, it was a crapshoot. So we went back and forth and um, watched tape and discussed and at the end of the day, Mike was saying we need to fill this must, and he was right. And that process of working that stuff out together, to me, was was one of the best things I could have asked for as a head coach. And um, you hear about relations between head coaches and GMs, and I think that I was really lucky in that aspect. Working for Bill right away, to me, was so fortunate because it set the bar, and it set the bar so high. And watching him as a head coach and watching the guys on his staff work, I thought to myself, okay, here's a incredibly smart guy with tremendous experience who works like he hasn't achieved anything, and that he's just trying to save his job. And you hear people talk about Jerry Rice that way, where he would show up to practice every day and treat it like he had the possibility to get cut. So for me to see that from a coaching perspective was exactly what I needed, and I couldn't have asked for anything better. And he's also a guy who went to Wesleyan, where I went to college, and played at the same level that I played at. So from a modeling perspective, you know, I knew what was possible if I did those things, and I think that helped drive me, because there were a lot of nights in the office where you're there at 2, 3 in the morning, especially as a young guy. I was breaking down tape, and you knew that you're going to get done with that, and another one was going to come. um, but seeing what was possible, uh, I think always acted as uh, sort of a lamppost, or a lighthouse, knowing that as long as I kept swimming towards the light, as long as I kept moving towards the light, eventually it was gonna be achievable.